All right, so we're gonna be recapping two meetings. The first is the January 2025 called board meeting. All the trustees were present. They discussed GPM 5.5 and CPM 4.1 and also provided a mid-year iReady result update and update on the Dallas Education Foundation. So GPM 5.5 was related to college enrollment. The district said that they were progressing in this goal. There was an increase from last year of about 3%, but they're off their target. One important thing to note is that this data is always lagged by a year, which is why it's showing class of 2022 and class of 2023. But it also shows the data disaggregated by student group. And in almost all of the groups, there was an increase from the previous year. The second thing they shared was CPM 4.1. This was related to the amount of proficient one or above teachers at high priority campuses. They showed this graph at first to show the progression from 2019 to now. So the dashed line that's blue represents all students. Since 2019, students at high priority campuses have had an 8% gain in access to effective teachers. But the district more notably pointed out, if you look at the dark blue line, it shows Black and African American students. They have had an increase of 13% during the same time frame of having access to proficient one or above teachers at high priority campuses. With that said, the district still said they were progressing in this goal. One of the things they shared was even though the amount of proficient one teachers at campuses have increased, at high priority campuses have increased, the gap between high priority campuses and non-high priority campuses and student access to proficient one teachers has actually increased. So basically, the access to proficient one or above teachers in core courses at high priority campuses, it's not accelerating at a fast enough rate to minimize that gap. So that's kind of what this data shows at the top. Some of the strategic adjustments they talked about were re-envisioning counseling services. So they said that they're going to provide kind of a vision of what that looks like in the next couple months. Also, hand scheduling students to prioritize access to those proficient one teachers and doing an audit in the fall. Having monthly professional development sessions, because ideally they would start moving teachers from progressing and below to that proficient one bucket. So those were some of the strategic adjustments. The discussion, Trustee Weinberg asked, what percentage of students are TSI ready due to College Bridge? And College Bridge is basically college prep programs, around 25%. And students take those if they do not get meets on the TSI for either reading or math. And then what resources do summer melt programs have? So college and career advisory programs, they hold office hours, parent meetings, assistance with financial aid and housing. In 2023, 1,600 students were assisted. 2024, that grew to 4,300 students. She did want to know, of those students who were helped, what is the actual percentage of students who matriculate to college then? And then how are teachers who are not proficient one or above supported? So they're identified by campus leadership for more professional development. Trustee Curry wanted to know the percentage of students who passed TSI in both reading and math is 26%. Also wanted to know how the district can close the gap between those proficient one teachers at high priority campuses and non-high priority campuses. So they talked about expanding professional development, but really mostly talked about evaluating the current stipend structure. So it's about between $4,000 to $8,000 of a stipend, depending on the teacher's proficiency level. But they did say that those campuses are still very hard to staff, which is why the gap remains. So they need to reevaluate the stipend structure even more. Trustee White wanted to know if proficient one teachers were hired or were they elevated to that role. So they were all elevated. Basically, a teacher can't carry over an effectiveness level from another district. So they would have to be kind of promoted by the district. And then Trustee Foreman wanted to know if effectiveness level includes the principal's evaluation. It does. She also wanted to know how many slots are available for proficient one and two teachers. Also wanted to know about scholarships. So in 2022, $300 million was awarded in scholarships to students for post-graduation. And then in 2023, that number increase to $400 million. She did want to know a breakdown of those scholarships by high school. Also wanted to know the number of substitute teachers on each campus. Asked if the district tracks progress of African American students at not only the high priority campuses, but the non-high priority campuses, and they do. And then how are counseling and career advisory programs, how those services tracked. So those programs have to submit monthly reports to the district that outline what services were offered and which students were helped. Trustee Michke wanted to know if there is predictive class of 2024 data available, even if it's not finalized. And yes, they do have that. Also wanted to know the number of HBCs and how many are ACE. So there are 81 high priority campuses in the district. Of those, 23 are ACE schools. And then best practices for college enrollment based on outperforming schools. So they did say that collectively, the CCMR score is strong across the district. There weren't really too many outliers in terms of schools who were doing exceptionally well. Trustee Mackey wanted to know how the district compares to the nation for college enrollment. So they are outperforming districts with similar demographics. Also wanted to know if TSI Met students have a higher rate of college enrollment. So about 70% of TSI Met students matriculate into college, but that does include students who pass by exam and then also pass with a college prep course. Want to know strong indicators for college enrollment. So basically, if a student's in P-Tech, early college, if they pass their AP exams or dual credit courses, that is a strong indicator that they will then enroll in college. We want to know how the district works with Dallas College to reach the students who aren't enrolling. So they have registration ready drives. They did say that about 25% of students say, on surveys or in other methods that they don't want to attend college at all. And then what accounts for growth of Proficient One teachers at high priority campuses. So they actively recruit those teachers. They also have retention incentives to make sure those teachers stay at those campuses, hand scheduling students, and then stipends is the biggest thing. They did share a mid-year iReady report. This also kind of leaks into the February meeting, so I won't go too in depth on this, but this is the math scores for the beginning of the year and middle of the year. So the green bars represent the students who are either meet or masters. And as you can see, as you look from left to right, there's an increase in students who are, getting meets or masters. The green bars are increasing. In the middle of the year, the red bars are decreasing, which represents the students who did not approach. And then they also shared Algebra 1 data because those students at the very bottom, those students did not take the iReady at the middle of the year. They took the Algebra 1 ACP, so they have that as well. And then this is the same data, but for reading. So same thing, percentage of students who are getting meets or masters. Those green bars are increasing from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, and the red bars are, for the most part, decreasing. And then they also shared an update on the Dallas Education Foundation. So the amount of money that was fundraised was almost $4 million. The grants that were dispersed, almost $3 million. The DISD's investment in the Dallas Education Foundation, which basically represents just salary and then like office space, is about $150,000. So its return on investment is about 1,800%. Some of the things that they did last year were increasing the number of book vending machines at elementary schools, as well as providing literacy toolkits to elementary schools. Discussion, Trustee Weinberg wanted to know what accounts for the progress on iReady. So iReady customizes paths for students in classrooms. Also wanted to know the relation to the high quality instructional materials. So this is the second year of implementation of the HQIM materials, and they utilized feedback from teachers to influence PLCs. Also wanted to know about progress monitoring. So iReady has embedded supports where students can see their strengths, areas of growth, and then they also have students have goal setting conferences with their teachers. Trustee Foreman wanted to know how iReady is aligned to STAR. So it's the same standards. It is criterion referenced. This is different from MAP, which the district previously used, which was a norm reference test. And the idea is criterion reference tests are typically easier to identify growth. The only difference with this is iReady does not have an embedded writing component, which is on the STAR. And then how are parents involved? They conference with parents as well at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year to share progress for students. Trustee Mackey wanted to know how Dallas Education Foundation determines the order in which schools receive those benefits, like the vending machines or the literacy toolkits. So they work with the early learning department and library services to identify those schools. Some donors do direct their funds to specific schools. So they might adopt a school, for example, in which case they have to then use that money for that specific school. And then what support does the Dallas Education Foundation need from the board? Just sharing the importance of the work with potential donors. Trustee Curry did want to know how when a donor, or organization, corporation adopts a school, how they can work with the district. The Dallas Education Foundation can work with the district to expand that donation to outside of those adopted schools. So they did say that they're currently working on strategy for an aligned comprehensive donor approach. So that was the January meeting. We'll go into the February meeting. All the trustees were present. They discussed some student outcome goals and constraints and the proposed new student outcome goals and constraints for the next 5 years. So again, this is kind of leaking over from January, but they shared iReady results. The first GPM was related to reading and math for all grades. One of the things they did note was last year they used MAP at this point of the year. This year they're using iReady. So they said they're progressing in this goal. There was a slight increase, but it's really hard to make a one-to-one comparison because it is a different test. So they did also share the data from the beginning of the year. You can see that in the chart under the green where it says 2024, 2025 iReady. And so when you compare it to the beginning of the year, pretty much there was an increase of at least 6 points for all student groups. And then they also shared the ACP data, in which there was an increase as well. GPM 1.2 is the same data, but specifically for African American students. So again, increase when compared to MAP from last year, increase from the beginning of the year. But hard to make one-to-one comparisons. And then 1.3 is related to just the students who got meets or masters. So again, increase when compared to iReady, increase from beginning of the year to the middle of the year. But again, hard to make those one-to-one comparisons. And then 4.1 was related to the same thing, iReady results, but only for the middle school grades. So for this, they did want to point out that there were increases from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year on iReady, but they also shared ACP data. This was related to the students who are in 8th grade who take the Algebra 1 ACP. They do not take iReady, they only take the ACP. And there was a decrease from last year's fall scores. So that was consistent for pretty much all the GPMs under goal 4. So this is the same data, but for African American students for GPM 4.2, again, there's a decrease when you look at the Algebra 1 ACP for those students in 8th grade. And then this is the same thing, but just the students who are getting meets or masters. So increase for iReady, but a decrease when you look at the ACP scores for Algebra 1 for 8th grade. And then they also shared teacher survey results from the survey that was given in the fall. So there was a slight increase from last year. They also shared, about 72% of responses were positive. They also shared that around 12% of responses were neutral. So when you combine that, 85% or so responses were not negative. And then they also showed each statement and, the response to that. Strategic adjustments, they talked a lot about providing structured time in middle school for the intervention block. They said they found a lot of success at the elementary school level, but it wasn't necessarily done to fidelity at the middle school level. And then having a staff who's, on every campus, who is an expert at the iReady software, and then providing opportunities for feedback with the principal and teacher focus groups. Trustee Weinberg wanted to know if students take both iReady and ACP. So they don't. So the ACP is just used for high school courses. So biology, English 1, Algebra 1. If a student took that ACP, they did not also take the iReady test. She did want to know why the ACP results are lower in middle school. So Again, the math and reading intervention blocks, they weren't scheduled as intentionally in middle school, so they thought that was an area of growth. How are students supported in the summer? There's an algebra bridge that's provided. How are teachers supported? So the professional development team at the central office level really are experts on the iReady software. They also have a curriculum central available to teachers that includes planning calendars, exemplary lessons. And then she also wanted to know if there were differences in the teacher survey scores for campuses where cell phones are restricted for the entire day. They didn't have that data, but they definitely can explore it, they said. Trustee Foreman wanted to know why there was a drop in the beginning of the year data when compared to last year. That's pretty consistent, where when you compare the middle of the year results from last year to this year's beginning of the year data, there is a decline. They did say, the tests are different, but students who don't attend summer enrichment typically do experience those declines. And then what percentage of students take the ACP in middle school? So it's about 46%, and those are students who are in Algebra 1. She also wanted to know which specific teacher concerns regarding culture and climate. Trustee Mackey wanted to know how the district determines if the student's on track. So iReady basically provides predictions based off the data of how that student will do on the star, meets, approaches, does not approach, masters. And then what is the district learning from the schools who are doing really well? So the intervention blocks, schools that had that scheduled did outperform. They also do calibration walks with the executive directors. They're pretty much on campuses every day to walk classrooms and learn from admin teams. Trustee Curry just wanted to know how the district supports alignment between iReady and the high quality instruction materials. So they said that is a focus of PLCs. And then how are the strategic adjustments developed? Trustee Mitchke wanted to know. So they basically scale strategies that seem to be working based on data and also observation feedback from executive directors and curriculum teams. And then Trustee White wanted to know what support is given to underperforming campuses. So they have targeted trainings, and then they work with the academic service departments to identify which services need to be available to campuses to either teachers and students. All right. And then finally, they discussed the proposed goals and constraints. So our current goals and constraints are set to expire at the end of this school year. And so they need new ones for the next 5 years. And then in the fall, all of the board trustees met with the public in community listening meetings to figure out what does the public want to see, reflected on these goals and constraints. So this is the first draft of this. The idea is there'll be several more iterations, and then the board will approve in May or June. So it's basically just high level topics. There's no percentages reflected in any of these goals yet. That'll come later. But goal 1 was related to 3rd grade star scores for reading and writing in domain 1. And all the GPMs below that kind of ladder up to 3rd grade. So 1.1 is related to kindergarten, 1.2 grades 1 and 2, and then 1.3 grades 2 specifically for African American student achievement. Goal 2 is very similar, but instead of reading, it's just for math. And the GPMs are pretty much identical, but shifted to math. Goal 3 is related to student achievement on the 8th grade STAR test for reading and writing. And then 3.1 and 3.2 are related to grades 6 and 7. So again, like laddering up to the 8th grade. 4 is very, very similar, but instead of reading, it's math. And same thing for GPMs 4.1 and 4.2. And then goal 5 was related to CCMR, so college, career, military ready percentage. 5.1 was surrounding TSI, 5.2 dual credit hours, and 5.3 college enrollment. And then the constraints 1 and 2 were related to the student experience and then the teacher experience respectively. So constraint 1 included survey scores and also an addition of extracurricular activities. And then constraint 2, survey scores for teachers, and then adding in a constraint around teacher retention. Goal 3 or constraint 3 is related to equity. So 3.1, that constraint was related to the access to proficient or higher teachers in priority campuses. 3.2 is related to African American and emergent bilingual student enrollment in rigorous coursework. And then the final constraint, 4.1, was related to personal financial literacy courses, and if students passed that. So the discussion, Trustee Curry said for the scores, they're all measured at that 50th percentile. What exactly is the rationale behind that? So 50% is basically an indicator of if the student is at approaches. They said that they could increase that, 60th percentile would be closer to meets. So they're just, would change that based off board feedback. And then why do the 6th and 7th grade goals not use the state assessment or STAR? If you look, it says TEKS aligned assessment. So they said that they want to be able to use longitudinal data from iReady. The idea is they're going to share all the STAR scores, at the beginning of the year for the previous year's STAR. So by using iReady, they would be able to share data from the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, in a way that they couldn't do with the end of course exam. He did say that CCMR, the way that it's currently structured, might not be a real measure of post-secondary preparedness. He added some context that currently the district's CCMR goal is at like 90%. But obviously 90% of students are not enrolling in college. So he did say that maybe goal 5 should be structured around the outcomes-based funding goals. These are a little bit more rigorous. They don't include any college prep courses. And then all the GPMs below it would align with that outcomes-based funding. He did share that domain 1, as it's written, includes the weighting of approaches, meets, and masters. So basically, to calculate the domain 1 score, they take a weighted average, for every student who gets approaches, the district basically gets 1 point, meets is 2 points, masters is 3 points, and then they take an average of that. So he said it's good to include that weighting because it does include those students who are at approaches and essentially passing the test. He did say he wanted some more information on growth relating to the A through F accountability system. Said that teachers should try to retain, the best teachers, and not necessarily all teachers, when it comes to the teacher retention component. And then 3.1, which was the access to proficient 1 or above teachers at high priority campuses. The way that it's written now, it basically says annually that number should increase by 1% every year, but it does not have a comparison to the non-high priority campuses. So that is maybe a area of growth because you can't really measure equity if you're not comparing it to, the non-high priority campuses. Trustee Foreman wanted to see a measures of success for career institutes and PTech. Also wanted to know if the financial literacy courses will cost the district anything extra, and they won't. She did say that students should not be pushed to rigorous courses when they're not ready, and she does support the constraint related to extracurricular activities. Trustee Johnson wanted to know the number of vacancies in core classes in District 5. Trustee Mackey just asked about domain 1 and what that means. So again, an aggregate score for approaches, meets, and masters. Also said it might be helpful to measure growth, specifically for 8th grade students. This would be domain 2, since students, will have results from previous year's STAR exams at that point. And he brought an example of a student is in 8th grade, but they're 3 grade levels behind, and they're able to grow, 2 grade levels that year. They still might not be at approaches, but that data won't be captured at all if you just look at domain 1. Did agree that they need to have a better indicator for postgraduate success, or CCMR. Also rethinking teacher retention if it does include those unsatisfactory teachers, because that might not be something that the district wants to, retain. And the way 3.1 is written now, in order for it to be truly equitable, the district would need to progress more than 1% annually of access to those proficient 1 or above teachers. He did mention that based off the community listening meetings, some of the things that weren't included, that was shared as feedback from the public, was effective special education services and effective use of resources. And the district said that they could look at those things. This is obviously just the first draft. Trustee Mitchgay talked about the language that TA uses for domain one, which is basically they use the word passing. That includes approaches, meets, and masters. The district said, essentially if a student passes their Algebra 1 test, that's great. They don't have to retake it anymore. And that includes if they just get approaches. He did mention that removing those unsatisfactory teachers and retention, it might make it hard to make comparisons to state. Also, the district should, determine which teachers can still be coached and move up the effectiveness ladder, and agreed that they still need to measure the gap between the proficient one or above teachers at high priority campuses versus non-high priority campuses. Trustee White wanted to know if the financial literacy class is an elective. It is. An enrollment in that class has doubled over the course of this past year. So clearly students are pretty interested in taking that as a course. And Trustee Weinberg did agree that there should be some focus on progression or growth. Also emphasize that the district, shouldn't lower the standards. So meets is technically meaning that the student is on grade level, whereas if a student is approaching, they are not actually on grade level, they're just approaching grade level. And the district did say that it kind of can be a both and solution. So generally, if students are pushed into, the approaches category, it follows that other students will be pushed into meets and other students will be pushed into masters. She did say the CCMR standard should capture that outcomes-based funding in some way or have that higher standard. And the district needs to retain strong teachers. And she also supported the goal related to financial literacy. So that was the meeting, and yeah, we'll be back for the next one in March.